session of 2025. Today's topic is taxes, trade, and tariffs. I think a very timely topic that we have going on right now. But before we do we begin our presentation, I'd like to recognize some of our sponsors who are, some of those folks are here in the room. Bank of America, Garmin, Gilmore & Bell, K-State Olathe, McCowan Gordon Construction, Mid-America Nazarene University, Terracon Consultants, and the University of Kansas Health System Olathe. Can we give them a round of applause? We do have one of our elected officials here in the room with us, Johnson County Commissioner Michael Ashcraft. Michael, can you stand and very involved? Thank you. It is my honor now to introduce our guest. Tom Sullivan. Had a chance to have dinner with Tom last night and get to know him a little bit better. Tom's got a very interesting background. Tom is the Vice President of Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, working with the U.S. Chamber's nationwide network. Mr. Sullivan harnesses the views of small businesses and translates that grassroots power into federal policy that bolster free enterprise, which we have talked a lot about, and reward entrepreneurship. He also runs the U.S. Chamber's Small Business Council, engaging those members to also gain their knowledge of what's happening across the country. Prior to his work at the U.S. Chamber, Tom worked at the National Federation of Independent Business. He was also general counsel at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I find this very interesting. He also worked as the SBA's chief counsel for advocacy under George W. Bush administration. He remains active in the Bush-Cheney alumni network. Tom and his wife live in Virginia, and they have 2 young sons. He is an IOM, which also, for those of you in the chamber industry, we have a number of folks that have gone through that. With that, I would like to have Tom come and talk about what's going on.
So I have my detailed notes here, mostly to keep me on track. I think Susie and Jim know I am highly caffeinated. I love my job. I have the best job in the entire chamber world. I get to represent small businesses before Congress, the White House, and really around the globe. And so I get wound up. I am already off script. But this is to kind of keep me on track so that I don't get too far off script. What I'd like to do today, this afternoon, is start by having a short video. It gives me goosebumps every time I see it, but kind of lays out what the U.S. Chamber is about. Obviously, it is about our partnership with the Olathe Chamber and about 1,600 Tim clones around the country. And then I'd like to dive into some data and talk about the economy, how it's doing, how we think it's doing, how we hope it's going to be doing, and then have plenty of room for questions and hopefully some answers from your questions. So with that, let's see if we can go, that's me. Let's see if we can go to the video.
Some see jobs. We see problem solvers. We see groundbreakers. We see risk takers. We see stories. Like a scientist turned CEO who went on to build a company producing medicines that saved the lives of millions. A young entrepreneur who started a business in a garage and now sells to dozens of countries around the world. A child who overcame dyslexia to lead the coding team at a global tech startup company. While every story is different, these stories have one thing in common: freedom. Freedom to dream, to create, to grow, and pursue. We are a nation where competition and collaboration coexist. A nation whose rich tapestry of people and ideas create innovation and opportunity. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we advocate, inform, connect, and fight for America through business growth, building strong relationships that push us forward with communities across the country and governments around the globe, so that the story of America continues to inspire the world.
This is the awkward pause in the presentation. Honestly, I love that. I love that video. I never get sick of watching it. If I have a down day, I crank it up on my laptop and watch it again. Before I dive into data, I do want to just take a second with a heartfelt thank you. 5 years ago today, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. At that point, when businesses were forced to shut down, people were battling with loved ones going to the hospital and other stuff. The chamber community came together in a way that really was amazing. And there are things that happened that I work on every day, working with Congress and the White House, that would not have been possible but for the partnership that Tim, who led the chamber, 1,600 other chambers of commerce, joining together to have webinars about what PPP means, what COVID EIDL loans are, how to get help, connecting small business owners with bankers. None of that really would have been possible without all of you, without Johnson County and other community leaders. And just one kind of point of that effort that truly amazes me 5 years later. In 7 months, we passed in 12 months, we passed 7 laws, all intended to help small business. When you think about that, especially in a kind of a partisan congressional environment, it's not easy to pass a law. Sometimes it's not even easy to name a post office, much less a law. But to pass 7 laws in less than a year truly was amazing. It's one of many examples of how the chamber community came together to advocate for the business community around the country. So thank you. At the U.S. Chamber, we represent about 3 million businesses. That includes members of about 500 trade associations, about 130 American chambers of commerce around the world, and like I said, 1,600 local, state, and regional chambers of commerce. Most of them are small businesses. We define small business as fewer than 500 employees. Little known fact, the vast majority of small businesses in the United States don't have employees at all, close to 83%. It's rare, but we're thankful that many small businesses also reach between 300 and 500 businesses, but we have the cutoff at 500 employees and under as small businesses. Now, as much as I would love to talk with 2.5 million small businesses every day, I can't. And so we try to take the pulse of small businesses with our partners, MetLife. We've been doing this for 8 years. We survey them every quarter. I'm going to run through pretty quickly I'm going to run through some of what we're seeing. Now, these data come from the end of last year. We're going to release our latest survey in 2 weeks. So I'll try to speckle what we're seeing now into some of these data that we see from a couple months ago. But first of all, the 32% figure that's on this slide, about 32% of small business owners are positive about the US economy. We're teetering about half and half, positive and negative. What I find fascinating about this particular piece of our broader index is we ask small businesses what they think of their local economy. And that is always considerably higher than the national economy. Now, it switches a little bit back and forth, but small businesses' perspective of how their local economy is doing, all the way back through the pandemic, the positive was greater than the negative. The view of how the national economy was doing was not always more positive than negative. Now, my boss, Suzanne Clark, a former small business owner herself, she likes to call this second-hand pessimism. There's a lot of reason for it, but I thought I would just point that out. Another data point that has shrunk a little bit in the last couple months, but it's still what I would call elevated, if I can pretend to be an economist, is how small business owners view their own books, their own financial health. We see 2/3 of small businesses being confident about their own books and how they are doing themselves. That hasn't changed that much. It's down a little bit, and we'll get into that word that is really all over data right now called uncertainty, which is the wet blanket on the economy right now. We'll get into that a little bit in a few minutes. Now, the I word. Probably the most front and center data point and small business experience on my radar, at least for the past 4 years, inflation. Inflation has ranked the highest of the list of concerns for 4 straight years. The data we'll release in 2 weeks has it still as the top concern. Now, the reason why that's the case, and it's a little bit different from what you'll read in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, is that people who are a lot smarter than me have a precise definition of what inflation is. The small business owners I work with, it's actually pretty simple. Things that cost more are inflationary. Like, that's it. Your employee costs more, that's inflationary. The cost of goods that you use for in your materials that you use, more expensive, inflationary. So from a small business perspective, even if the headlines are inflation is down, they're just not feeling it yet. And so that's why inflation continues to be the top concern. We did a little bit of work at the end of the Biden administration about whether or not the tolerance level of small businesses with more and more federal micromanagement had reached kind of a peak. It was getting there. I'm convinced that if President Biden had had a second term, that the anxiety of rules coming out of Washington, D.C. would have hit an all-time high, but that is not the case. So there is a sense of optimism among many folks in the small business world. And you don't have to have Superman vision to understand these two graphs. You just have to kind of, hopefully, have good enough eyeglasses to see that gray chunk on the left graph went up at a certain point. And that certain point is COVID. Now, just a quick question to see if you're still awake after a delicious barbecue. How many years do you think it took for new startups? So I file an employer identification number. That means it's a new startup, the way the government defines it. So how long did it take for new startups to grow after the 2008-2009 recession? Any guesses? All right, we got 3 years. I feel like an auctioneer. We got 3, going on 3. I hear 4. Do I hear anybody say 5?
7.
All right, 7. All right, we're getting there. It took 10 years for a relatively flat, if you can see that left-hand side of that gray, it's relatively flat for about 10, 20 years, really, about growth in new business applications. And that's 10 years after 2008. It took for there to be an upward trajectory of new business applications. You'll see that spike downward, that's COVID. 4 months. It only took 4 months for new businesses to spike after COVID. Now the answer, actually, there's 2 reasons for that answer. One that I like to talk about, one that I don't like to talk about. The one I don't really like to talk about is because government shoved an incredible amount of money at the economy. Small business, large business, nonprofits, education, I mean, just tons and tons of money because that's what it took to try to get the economy back on track. So that's one reason. The other reason, though, that I do like talking about is it just makes common sense. I mean, entrepreneurs solve problems. Like if you talk with someone who's thinking of starting a business and it's not solving some problem, you may want to urge your friend to reconsider. I mean, if it's a market gap or a problem that has to be solved, small businesses, entrepreneurs fill that gap. And at no time in our recent history has there been a bigger set of problems. Now, the data actually support this. So that the spike was primarily transportation, logistics, and warehousing. And when you think about it, like how many packages can FedEx and UPS deliver? And the answer is not enough. So in swoop entrepreneurs. Now data also show that transportation, logistics, and warehousing, they morphed, those same businesses morphed into the e-commerce world. So a logistics company all of a sudden becomes partner with Home Depot so that you can go online, buy a grill, it's miraculously assembled and sitting at the curbside at Home Depot when you go with Tim in his truck and pick it up in a few days. Now, in that transaction, there are 7 to 12 different small businesses that were crushing it right after COVID. And the idea that you have an online retail presence changed from luxury to a necessity. And that necessity, even though I think most folks think, oh, well, there's a few computer people and a few people at Home Depot that benefited. They don't understand that there's 6 to 12 businesses in that chain of events that contribute to Tim being able to pick up that fully assembled grill at Home Depot on the weekend. So data show that they morphed into this e-commerce world. Now, when you get to on the right-hand side, that is the same graph specific to Kansas. And it's gone down a little bit in the last month, but even where that giant arrow is pointing, you'll notice it's still above pre-COVID. And that's positive. So no matter what kind of challenges we're taking on at the US Chamber of Commerce, and some of you are taking on here, whether it's workforce, taxes, tariffs, I take enormous optimism in the fact that there's this feedstock of new businesses coming up that no one really knows what's going to happen. I'm optimistic, but we don't know what's going to happen with these new businesses. We only know that there's a higher level than ever before. It's been sustained for 5 years. That gives me optimism. So, uncertainty. That word is certainly the word of the month, possibly the word of the quarter, hopefully not the word of the year. And there are various reasons for uncertainty, whether it be high interest rates, whether it be thinking about whether parts of the tax code will expire at the end of this year, or whether or not tariffs are going to be put on products that relate to what you do, or as a member of a family, what you provide yourself and your family. That uncertainty is acting as a wet blanket that is stifling small business growth. Now, when I say that, it's not just instinctual, it's based on data. There's one particular data point that I focus on more than others, and that is that when we ask small business owners, are you investing? Are you making capital investments in your business? If the answer is yes, that tells me small businesses are in a growth mode. If the answer is no, it doesn't mean that the business is failing. It just means that they're not opening up their pocketbook or their checking account to make those type of investments that they're planning on growing their business. So it means they may be fine, and there are other data that would say if they're doing well or failing, but they're not growing. And at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we are all about growth. We believe that we must get to a sustainable 3% growth to make sure that our kids have the same type of life that we're able to enjoy now. And when you start going micro points below 3% growth, it gets a little bit dicey. And so any blanket on growth, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is looked at with concern, and we try to push back to turn it around. Now this picture here is just actually from last week. It's pretty recent. We had a fly-in of small business owners who were trying to convince Congress that if certain provisions are renewed in the tax code, they would spend those savings on growing their business. Because unfortunately, many members of Congress don't understand how profit works. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, it should not surprise you, we believe profit's good. We believe that profit enables businesses, large and small, to reinvest in their employees, reinvest in their communities. But a lot of members of Congress don't understand that. So anytime you get a chance to come to Washington with Tim or anyone else and just kind of educate, it's a good thing. And we have this fly-in with small business owners, and Tracy Tapney is a sheet metal fabricator. The way she describes it is she does sheet metal origami just north of Twin Cities, Minnesota, so just north of Minneapolis. And she relies pretty heavily on aluminum. And so just today, President Trump announced he's doubling the tariffs on aluminum. And Tracy got on CNN to explain what I call the squeeze. So that squeeze is, Tracy and her company is called Wyoming Machine, which is very confusing because it's not in Wyoming. Tracy runs a business that is all business to business. So she sells to John Deere, she sells to other large manufacturers, and her sheet metal are component parts to her business customers. And so her business customers are directly affected by some of these tariffs. They go to Tracy and they say, we can't really raise our prices. So we've got to renegotiate the terms of the orders that we place. And that's a squeeze, and it's already happening. And Tracy tried to explain that it's not so simple as, I'm in construction, I rely on lumber, the cost goes up $2.50. It's more this squeeze that happens, and the end result is everything becomes more expensive. Now sometimes it is actually easier to explain. We have Karen Olson-Beacon, runs a Pepsi Coors distributorship up in, she's up in Montana. And for her, it's pretty basic math. These tariffs cost 26 additional cents per case. And I'm trying to think of my college years of cases of beers and what that means for a cost of a six-pack. I never figured it out. But for her, an increase of 26 cents per case is a huge, huge deal. They're selling a lot of six-packs, her trucking fleet, her inventory. So sometimes it is actually simple to calculate. When she says, oh, 26 cents a case, it's gonna go up. And then that cost is borne to her customers. If you can't tell by the way that I'm describing this, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is not a fan of broad tariffs. And what we're trying to convince the White House to do is to pivot away from the punitive and into the incentive. And I'm gonna actually, again, go off script. It's a little bit like parenting, at least for me. I have 2 teenage boys. There's always that balance. It's like, when do you use a carrot? When do you use a stick? We would really, really like the president to use the carrot of opening up more trade opportunities around the world. I was looking last night after we had dinner, I was looking at how many additional countries have been added to our free trade arrangements around the world, which is a little bit odd to do after a nice dinner, but that's my life. There are 20 countries that have had free trade agreements with the United States over the past 10 years. We have added 1. We added Japan for critical minerals about 3 years ago. We think there's this opportunity to take pride in what America does, in what we produce, goods and services, open up other markets for us to sell that pride in Americanship around the world. I also am allowed to make up words like Americanship because I worked for President George W. Bush. So that's part of the alumni network, is you can just make up words. But this pride that the United States should and does have in what we do, we are really trying to work with the White House to convince them, direct the energy you're using from a punitive perspective into opening up additional markets. And I think only time will tell on whether or not we're successful. But as a dad, I will admit that many times the carrot does work better than the stick. Shifting a little bit away from tariffs, punitives, and a respectful disagreement with the White House strategy, I do want to focus on 2 policy initiatives. We're working hand in hand with the president and with the Republican Congress, and we're hoping it will actually help minimize the uncertainty that businesses are facing right now. First of all, the tax code. At the end of this year, a number of pro-growth provisions expire. Now, the result of that, if Congress doesn't do anything, is a massive tax fight, especially on small businesses, because in the 2017 tax law, there is the ability for small businesses to take a 20% deduction. And again, if you couldn't tell, I'm not the greatest at math, but my boss tells me roughly now small businesses are paying about a 29% marginal rate. If Congress does not extend that particular deduction, they'll end up paying roughly a 39% marginal rate next year. And when I talk with small business owners about, okay, so next year your rate's going to be 39%, how are you going to deal with it? Oh, the pain that they go through in trying to kind of rejigger in their mind, because I think they're thinking of specific people that will lose their jobs. Sometimes projects that they've had in the works for 3 to 5 years, all of a sudden they're envisioning hitting the pause button on these projects that will help their community. So the look of pain that small business owners have when asked what they would do with a higher marginal rate, something we're trying to translate into activism on Capitol Hill. Now, there is an alignment. President Trump wants this. Republicans in the House and the Senate want the extension of these pro-growth tax provisions. But I can tell you, that does not make it easy. To sound like an accountant, we're talking about amortization, but small businesses know that anytime you have to amortize something over a number of years, what you're really doing is you're tying up capital that can be used now. Capital that can be used for pay raises, hire that dream employee you wanted to hire, update your technology, things like that. And so the amortization takes away from the ability of small businesses to invest cash now. So we're bullish on this. I personally believe that the certainty of tax policy going forward will do a lot to kind of smooth out some of the uncertainty that we're seeing right now. Also, my friend Natalie Caddis, who runs a thermoplastic manufacturing company out in Salt Lake, she has been a proponent of reducing regulation, like reducing the ridiculousness of filing the same paperwork at a local, state, and a federal level. Like, why can't they all just talk and leave me alone? May have been one of the quotes that she said to me. President Trump has a remarkable history of deregulation. In his first term, really set the record for smoothing out and just removing unnecessary rules and regulations. His mandate to his cabinet was for every one rule that you need to issue, you remove 2. This term, he's saying, okay, we were relatively successful during my first term. This time, for every one regulation that you say you have to publish, you got to remove 10. And I think it's possible. What we're doing is we're trying to look at the process the president's putting in place and figuring out ways, how do we cement that into legislation so that after President Trump leaves office, the business community has greater certainty. So for instance, we're working on a bill that would insert small businesses into the regulatory process in a way that makes sure agencies have a more confident sense of looking at their mission, protecting the environment, protecting financial resources, protecting the border, other things. Inserting small businesses into the process has to actually end up with more commonsensical rules of the road. But agencies have to kind of be forced to do that. And so we're looking at a law that will require small businesses input long-term, and we think that it'll go far from the positive things the president's doing now to cement them longer term, which ultimately will help provide certainty, and we're optimistic for its passage. Now, there's always advice you can get a phone call away from Tim. And we also want you to take advantage of advice that we try to push out through our digital platform. Things are happening at such a rapid pace, it's amazing that anyone can keep track. And so we are trying to take advantage of our digital platforms, just push information out. And we do this through the small business digital platform that's called CO. C-O. There's a key difference in how we try to convey this information. All of the tools and tips that are on this digital platform come from the narratives of small business owners. So for instance, how do you optimize search engine optimization, SEO? We have an article on CO that doesn't just give advice, it gives advice from an entrepreneur who didn't know what SEO meant and needed to build a web presence in a way that would benefit her business. And so that's how we convey this information. Tools and tips like, what's the most popular franchise being started? Where are grants at a state and local level? What the heck is going on with the Corporate Transparency Act and the beneficial ownership information reporting if there were some CPAs here, I just gave you a headache. You know, all of these questions that are flowing all the time, the answers are given through the language of small business owners, through their own stories. We're hoping that it's helpful. We had 6 million visitors at this site last year. We're on track to double, triple that this year. We're optimistic. But again, it's just one way that we're trying to convey information that will benefit the Olathe Chamber of Commerce, benefit you as business leaders, as business owners. And it does reflect a learning, quite frankly, from the COVID pandemic. Before the COVID pandemic, if a small business owner had called me and said, "What's a 1099? Said, "Fetch, I don't know. Ask your accountant." But if you want to change the tax code and lobby Congress and the White House and others to actually have a pro-growth tax policy, like, let's talk. That's what we do at the chamber. That all changed in COVID when Tim and others needed help translating this federal gobbledygook coming out of Washington, D.C., needed to translate what a PPP meant or what an SBA loan meant, disaster loan. And we used the digital platform to answer those questions. And after things settled down, although they never really settled down, our CEO came back and said, "We got to keep doing it. We're not going back to, we only do lobbying and we'll leave the advice stuff to everybody else." So we could do 2 things at once. And so she's committed to growing this small business digital platform. It's made my job a lot easier because now if I get a call from someone says, "Hey Tom, what's a 1099? I quickly go online to this site, I put it in a search term, and I give them an answer. I certainly don't know the answers to everything, but I know that this small business digital platform knows most of the answers to most everything, and most importantly, from the view of another small business owner, not a policy expert like me. So with that, we have time for some questions, but let me first close by thanking Tim and the Olathe Chamber for having me here. It is the best part of my job to go and visit with chambers, but it's a unique opportunity to go to a 5-star chamber like the Olathe Chamber of Commerce. So it's great to be here with you this afternoon. You guys can clap. It's up there. Any questions, comments, concerns, observations, hopes, dreams? That content. Wow.
Thanks.
Yeah. Wow. This is tremendous. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
I'll start. Thank you so much for the information. It's definitely going to bookmark that digital resource there. So thank you for that. Thank you. What are you going to work on next? What's your next big thing?
Next big thing. We got to figure out workforce. I visit wonderful growing communities like Olathe, and there are jobs, but not necessarily folks either qualified or who want this job. It's so simple but so complicated at the same time. There is a group that I get to work with, and honestly, most of my work is just trying to keep up with the 400 other professionals I work with. There's a group that runs this program called Talent Pipeline Management. And of course, because they're based in Washington, it has an acronym, like TPM. And they're trying to figure this out. And they are working with folks like Tim and his counterparts all across the United States. And they're getting hit on some things that are just so simple, but are not being executed. Things like, has the workforce board met with the superintendent of schools and the Chamber of Commerce. Now, my guess here, because of the way you operate, like that's a given. There are different parts of the United States, like, and it's so foreign of a concept. Why would the superintendent of schools meet with like the workforce board and the chamber? And the answer is workforce, because if that triangle aren't all best friends, we're not going to figure it out. And so I think workforce is probably the next big challenge that I'll try to work on. I laugh because when we talk about talent pipeline management, there are all these complex tools and graphs and everything. And I always laugh, like, look, the pipeline a small business owner has is like on a little index card. They list the people they want to hire, or they follow them on LinkedIn. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but getting the community leaders to talk together the way they do in Olathe is a challenge. So I hope it's okay, but there are many things that are going on here in this community that deserve to be lifted up and shared with other parts of the country so that they can get it right too. Jim, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah, does the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have like an energy policy, like they would advocate for better use of resources, these for natural resources and or power grid optimization, if you will?
Yeah, so the question was, do you have, does the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have an energy team? The answer is, heck yeah. They're an amazing group of people who are all at what's called, I mean, if you're an energy nerd, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's called Sierra Week down in Houston. Started by this guy, Daniel Yergis, like the grandfather of energy policy. So yes, there is an energy group that has been unleashed, really, in the last several months about being the energy independence and export opportunity that is immediately in front of the United States. I mean, for the past 4 years, we've been arguing about liquefied natural gas and the resources that are a gift at the United States that can be shared with the world, and some choke points that have been going on to prevent that from happening. So this presidency, this president is of the same mind. And so our energy group is really, really excited. They know the new Secretary of Energy very well, speak very highly of him. And I'm excited that of all of the uncertainty that I've talked about, lowering energy prices will go really far in calming folks down. And it's one of the reasons we're so concerned about how we're treating Canada, because heavy crude for Canada goes to be, I'm going to get a little wordy on energy stuff, but the heavy crude from Canada is what feeds the Midwest and Gulf Coast refineries. So they actually can't operate without the heavy crude from Canada, because the crude oil coming from the United States is too sweeter. It's too light. Thank you, Eric. The opposite of heavy. So it's too light. And so we're worried about that disruption, which is the negative, but we're really excited about the president's view of liquefied natural gas and other types of electricity reforms that will truly unleash an economic growth in the United States. So, and I'm happy to make sure that Tim is able to follow up with you to connect me directly with our energy team. They're all in Houston this week for Sierra Week, but it's a great part of the U.S. Chamber. So thank you for that question.
I just want to say, Anna Paula, and the representatives gave us their kindness and great interest in go to Washington into advocate policy, but she wants to hear from all the small businesses in the area. And there's several ways you can do that. You can either call our office or you can have Katie and her team liaison. And she wants to know any legislation they want passed, anything that's a concern. And you'd like for her to get it. She has a chance in it. But she would like to use ideas there.
So would it be okay if I gave a shout out to the Congresswoman, because she played a big role in something that's actually on the screen. So this wasn't all planned out, by the way. This is just coincidence. But so there has been this back and forth about small business owners having to report to a part of the Department of Treasury about who actually owns the business. The intention was to try to crack down on money laundering and financial support for terrorist organizations. But the implementation of it by this office has just been really awful. And it's made a relatively simple reporting requirement really complicated. Congresswoman Davis was one of the first members of Congress to sign on the legislation that would have removed that burden from small businesses. Now, luckily, a week ago, the president said we're not going to enforce this against small business, but I think the Congresswoman deserves recognition and thank you for really being a pioneer on trying to remove regulatory burden for small business. So please thank her for us, and just another good example of how a Congresswoman works across party lines to get things done for small business. So thank you.
Elon interested is that a portion of small business funding goes to young kids, 11 years old, older or younger. Is that true, or is it just correct?
So I think the question was on Elon Musk and whether government funding goes to young entrepreneurs. I don't know. I don't know. I'm a big fan of junior achievement, and other programs that illuminate the power of entrepreneurship in young men and women's minds, but I honestly don't know how that's funded. So sorry, I can't answer that question. It cannot be a meeting with a Washington person not being asked by Elon Musk, so I appreciate the question.
The tariffs. So you said your place, the chamber does meet with the White House. How do you have any insight on the view of these tariffs? I would like to optimistically believe there's a lot of just grandstanding to get people to the table and kind of just renegotiate, or are these like actual, just because the sentiment that it causes people an emotional, I don't say emotional distress, but just getting people riled up about these things, that's not good for the economy. So is this really just rhetoric, or is he really going to go through with all of these and, make things, essentially more expensive for tariffs?
Look, so thank you. I'm going to try to take each of those three threads of the questions separately. So the first is how often we communicate with the White House. Second, whether or not the anxiety matters. The third, what's the end game? So that's what I heard you ask. So first, I'm glad you asked the question about how often we talk to the White House, because sometimes when I focus on one or two challenges, that kind of overcomes the rest of our relationship. We work twice a day, every day, with various aspects of the White House and federal agencies. And most of the time, it's on positive developments that we're working together, primarily to connect the business community with elected and appointed leaders. And I don't want my discussion of tariffs to take away from that relationship. I shared with Tim and the team earlier today, as a perfect example, there are two people who are the musicians that were nominated to work at the Small Business Administration, and I'm working with them to get confirmed by the Senate, and I will be working with them as they get into their position. That is much more the rhythm of working with elected and appointed officials. So that's one. The second, your observation about anxiety is real. Anxiety then does manifest itself economically, whether it's the cost of eggs, which is not have anything to do with tariffs, to, whether or not tariffs are raising prices or not. And what I see are, small businesses and big business CEOs, they're human beings. They shop at grocery stores, and that anxiety affects what their plans for going forward. So it's real, and it has a real impact on how the economy is doing. Now, the end game strategy is, I'll start with the ultimate answer is I don't know. But one of the things I learned from business leaders, Tim was nice enough that this morning, was that there is a chronology that's worth paying attention to answer that question. And we will all discover what the end game is together. That next piece of the chronology is in the beginning of April, when every agency is supposed to report to the president, where is there an imbalance? How is India, for instance, treating American-made goods that are being imported into India? And out of that spreadsheet is supposed to be a strategy to address agency by agency, product and service by product and service, for a surgical approach to leveling the playing field. What we would hope comes out of that is a plan that is certain. It may be harmful, but that it's certain. And that you don't have necessarily the circus right now of kind of whiplash of 25%, zero products under US, Mexico, Canada agreement, and then this morning doubling the tariffs on steel and aluminum. It gets so complicated that you think, oh my gosh, this is just chaos, there's no plan. I think the more we move away from that and towards the precision of a laid out plan, the less anxiety we'll have. And from a chronology, what I learned from business leaders this morning was that next date on the chronology is early April. And then we'll see the president's response to what he's tasked his cabinet members to lay out for him. I'm optimistic that it be a more surgical approach, but I honestly don't know. So once again, thank you for just listening so carefully.
Tom, thank you very much. I'm glad that question was asked because that's the root of what we're, I think, here about. And, Tom told us earlier, U.S. Chamber is about free trade. And ultimately, that's where they stand. And a more surgical approach as opposed to a hammer is, I think, what they're looking for. I don't mean to put anything in Tom's mouth, but that's kind of what he shared with us earlier. So I'm glad that question got asked. So once again, thank you for being here. I do want to thank our sponsors really quick. Bank of America, Garmin, Gilmore Bell, K-State Olathe, McAllen Work Construction, Mid-America Nazarene University, Tariff Consultants, and the University of Kansas Health System. We'll leave that help. Thank you all for your sponsorship of that. You will notice at your desk or at your table a flyer that has our next business lunch, which I think is also very topical, which is a discussion about the World Cup and how that will impact us next year. I mean, the date I think is wrong on that, and that's going to be May 21st.
Okay.
So please, we look forward to you coming to that event and hearing more about the World Cup. Once again, Tom, thank you for being here. We appreciate the safe travels back to Washington. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.